Hi, my name's Aileen. The night I told my husband I was pregnant, he didn't hug me. He grabbed my wrist, stared at my stomach, and screamed, "Whose child is it, you filthy woman?" Before I could breathe, he snapped my leg like it meant nothing. Blood, silence. My baby kicking inside me while I laid on the kitchen floor, broken. Everyone told me he was a good man. Even after the bruises, they still called me lucky. But if I told you what came next, you'd understand why he wakes up behind bars now, haunted. Before we dive in, tell me, where are you listening from? And have you ever loved someone who almost destroyed you? The house smelled like roasted chicken and rosemary, the kind of smell that used to make Damon smile when he walked through the door. I'd been standing at the stove for nearly an hour, glancing at the clock every few minutes, running through the words in my head like a nervous schoolgirl. "We're having a baby." Just 3 words. It shouldn't have been this hard. The evening light spilled through the kitchen window, washing the walls in gold. The table was set, candles lit, nothing fancy, just enough to feel special. I wanted him to see effort, to feel cared for. My hands rested on my belly for a moment, instinctively, though there wasn't much to show yet. I whispered, "He's going to be happy. He has to be." When Damon finally came in, the sound of his shoes against the hardwood was sharp, impatient. He tossed his jacket over the chair without looking at me. "Smells good," he said flatly. I smiled, even though the tone felt wrong. "There's something I've been wanting to tell you." He reached for a beer, twisted the cap off, and leaned against the counter. "Yeah?" I hesitated, trying to steady my breath. "I went to see Dr. Talia today. I'm pregnant, Damon." The silence that followed was heavier than anything I'd ever known. His eyes didn't blink. His lips barely moved before the words came, low and hard. "Whose child is it?" I laughed at first, thinking I'd misheard. But the air around him changed, his face twisted, his hand clenched around the bottle. "Whose child, Aileen? You filthy woman, whose?" I froze. "Damon, it's yours. The bottle hit the floor, shattering. He moved so fast I barely saw it coming. A hand grabbed my arm, the sting of his shove sending me backward into the wall. My shoulder hit the mirror we'd hung after our wedding. The glass cracked, spiderwebbing from my reflection outward. The next thing I felt was the floor against my cheek and the sharp, tearing pain in my leg. He stood over me, breathing heavy, eyes wide like a man who'd just realized what he'd done, but only for a second. Then he stormed out, slamming the door behind him. For a moment, I couldn't hear anything except my own breathing. My hand went straight to my stomach. "It's okay," I whispered to the child I couldn't yet feel. "It's okay, baby. Please hold on." The room was dim now. I pushed myself up, glass cutting my palms, and looked toward the mirror. My reflection stared back in fragments, pieces of a woman I barely recognized. My face was streaked with blood, my eyes hollow. It wasn't me anymore. The clock ticked. Somewhere outside, a car engine started. I heard his tires screech away. The house went still. I dragged myself to the couch, my leg throbbing. The phone was too far. I couldn't stand. I pressed a towel to the wound and waited for the bleeding to slow. When I finally closed my eyes, I thought of Dr. Talia. Her calm voice, her quiet way of saying, "You deserve safety, Aileen." Hours later, I woke to the sound of keys at the door. I expected Damon, but it was Beatrice, his mother. She walked in without knocking, her perfume hitting the air before her voice did. What on earth happened here? I couldn't answer. Her eyes darted to the broken glass, then to my leg. "Did you fall?" she asked sharply. When I didn't respond, she sighed. "Don't tell anyone, Aileen. People talk. Families survive because they stay private." "Private?" I whispered. She pulled out her phone and made a quick call. "I'll get a nurse. Damon said you slipped while cleaning. You should be more careful." I almost laughed at how easily the lie slid from her mouth. "He told you that?" Her look hardened. "You know how men are when they're stressed. Don't make things worse." When the nurse arrived, a young woman I didn't recognize, Beatrice hovered like a supervisor. I sat there, silent, as my wound was cleaned and bandaged. The nurse asked if I'd seen a doctor. Beatrice answered for me. "No need. It's minor." After they left, I sat in the quiet again. The lights from the street cut through the blinds in narrow stripes, landing on the floor like prison bars. I stared at them until they blurred. Later that night, I found an old notebook in the drawer beside the bed. I opened it to a blank page and began to write, "If I disappear, it's because I was too quiet." The words looked too small to mean anything, so I tore the page out and folded it. I slipped it between the pages of my Bible, the one my mother gave me when I married Damon. She used to say that truth always finds its way home. I lay there until morning, half asleep, half listening for his car. When it finally pulled into the driveway, I sat up. My body tensed at the sound of his footsteps coming down the hall. The door opened slowly. In his hands was a bouquet of red roses, a card tucked inside. His face was calm, soft even. "Morning, sweetheart," he said, his voice almost gentle. "I shouldn't have yelled. I just lost my head." I stared at the flowers. The scent hit me like poison. He placed them on the table, leaned down, and brushed my hair behind my ear. "Let's forget last night, okay? We'll start fresh." The reflection of the mirror's cracks glimmered behind him in the morning light. I couldn't take my eyes off it. When I woke the next morning, his apology was waiting, wrapped in roses and lies. I didn't say a word as he placed the roses on the kitchen table. There were 12, red as blood, wrapped in cellophane and silence. He leaned down with a cautious smile, like a man offering peace after a storm he swore wasn't his fault. "I got breakfast too," he said. "From that diner you like, with the blueberry muffins." The box smelled warm and sweet, but my stomach twisted. He moved around me, careful not to touch. Then, with a strange kind of ceremony, he knelt and pulled a small box from his pocket. A diamond necklace lay inside, too bright for morning light. "I lost control," he said softly, looking up at me with practiced sorrow. "Work's been hell. I wasn't thinking straight. You know I'd never hurt you on purpose." I watched him take my hand. He kissed it gently, brushing the bruises with his lips. I flinched, but didn't pull away. Survival sometimes looks like acceptance. I smiled barely, because I knew that was the response he expected. He said sorry like it was a password, to unlock my forgiveness and reset the day. Later that week, the house filled with laughter and polite conversation. Damon had invited 2 of his friends over, along with Beatrice. He wanted normalcy, or maybe a performance. I wasn't sure which. The dining room table was spotless, the food catered in. I sat on the far end, my legs still aching, my body stiff beneath a soft blue dress he picked out for me that morning. "She's my rock," he said to the guests, lifting his glass. "She's everything I ever prayed for." Everyone clapped, smiling at me like I'd won some prize. I nodded and smiled too, though the corners of my mouth trembled. Beneath the tablecloth, my bruised leg throbbed with each word of praise. Every compliment was a twist of the knife, a reminder of the lie we all agreed not to name. The room buzzed with stories and second helpings. But my ears only caught fragments: laughter from someone's joke, the clink of silverware, the scrape of a chair leg. It was all noise on the surface, drowning the ache beneath it. When the guests had gone and the dishes were cleared, I stayed behind to wipe down the counters. Beatrice followed, leaning against the doorframe like a shadow. "You did well tonight," she said quietly. "You didn't make things awkward." I didn't look at her. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. Men have pressure. They make mistakes. But we don't hang them for it. We forgive. That's what marriage is. I kept wiping the same spot on the counter. Don't embarrass him, she added. People notice, and if they start talking... I nodded, once. Not in agreement, but just enough to make her leave. Every polite nod felt like a small erasure. I could feel myself fading, one silent concession at a time. The next morning, I sat in Dr. Talia's office, waiting for the hum of the Doppler. She moved the device gently across my belly, her eyes flicking between the monitor and my face. "The baby's strong," she said. I nodded. She hesitated before asking, "Aileen, are you safe at home?" I smiled too quickly. "Of course." But my hands wouldn't stop trembling. She didn't push. Instead, she folded the prescription slip and handed it to me. Inside, almost invisible behind the paper, was a tiny card, a number, no words, just that lifeline tucked in silence. Back home, I slid the card into the back of my wallet, hidden behind insurance papers. I didn't know if I'd ever call it, but holding it made my breath a little steadier. That night, I made spaghetti. Damon was late, and when he walked in, the sauce had cooled. He sniffed the air and frowned. "Is it cold?" "I can warm it up." He dropped his keys hard on the counter. "You had one thing to do, Aileen." My heart pounded. He didn't yell, not loudly, but the words cracked like ice. "If you can't be a wife, why are you even here?" He stormed into the living room. I stood there, frozen, my body remembering pain before it even arrived. But I didn't cry. Instead, I walked quietly into the bedroom, opened the drawer where I kept my scarves, and slipped my phone beneath them. I tapped the record button, then walked back out like nothing happened. He complained about the TV remote, the mail, the noise from the neighbor's dog. It didn't matter what set him off. He just needed something to blame. The phone caught it all. It was my first small rebellion, silent, invisible, tucked inside a drawer. Later, in the quiet of our bedroom, he was asleep beside me. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I pressed play. His voice filled the air, sharp, dismissive, cruel. My hand clenched the sheet. Proof doesn't heal, but it prepares you. The sound of his voice still rang in my ears, even in the quiet. I'd replayed that recording more times than I'd admit. Each time I braced myself for the same sting. But the sting began to dull, and with it, my fear started to shift. It wasn't gone. It just had somewhere else to go. 2 months passed. My bruises faded, but the silence between us turned colder. I thought returning to church might bring a sense of normalcy, or at least give me something to do besides tiptoe around a man who pretended to be holy on Sundays and hateful by Monday morning. The sanctuary smelled like lemon oil and old wood pews. It should have comforted me. It used to. But now it felt different, like walking into a room where someone had just been gossiping and suddenly stopped when you entered. The whispers didn't wait long. "She's expecting," one woman muttered, just loud enough to be heard. "But not from him, they say." I paused mid-step, fingers tightening on the back of the pew. Beatrice stood beside me, all pearls and lipstick, offering her usual stiff smile to everyone who passed. She didn't even flinch. She knew. Or worse, she helped. My throat burned. He hadn't just hurt me. He'd rewritten the story. And people believed him. I wasn't the battered wife. I was the cheating one, the unstable one, the cause. He didn't just hit me, I thought, staring straight ahead as the choir began to sing. He erased me and replaced me with his story. Later that week, Damon hosted a charity brunch at the country club. I didn't want to go, but he insisted, said people would talk if we skipped out again. I wore a loose cardigan that hid the scars and a smile that didn't belong to me. He worked the room like he owned it. flashing that grin, pouring wine, telling stories that made everyone laugh. "She's a real trooper," he said, raising his glass. "Honestly, with how often she's at the doctor, you'd think she was carrying twins." Laughter rippled through the table. He looked directly at me then, eyes glinting with something darker. "Although, who knows with that much time spent with Dr. Talia, right?" I froze. The room blurred for a moment. My hand clutched the teacup tighter than I meant to. Too tight. I felt the ceramic press into my palm, then warmth, then pain. The tea had spilled, scalding my skin. I didn't make a sound. I just set the cup down and excused myself to the bathroom, cradling my hand under cold water. I stared at my reflection, eyes dull, cheeks pale. The redness on my skin was spreading, but it was nothing compared to what I carried underneath. At home later that evening, he fell asleep on the couch, still dressed from the brunch. I sat at the dining table, the laptop open in front of me. He'd left it unlocked, careless, or maybe too confident to care. I didn't plan to snoop, but the moment I saw her name, Claire, in his inbox, I clicked. The messages were intimate, familiar, long, threads of hotel bookings, money transfers, affectionate nicknames. She wasn't just a fling, she was a second life, a cleaner one he didn't have to control with bruises and lies. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I grabbed a flash drive from my desk drawer and quietly copied every file. "If he could play God," I whispered, "then I'd start playing detective." He came home drunk 3 nights later, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the cabinets. I was folding laundry in the living room. "You go through my stuff now," he shouted. I didn't answer. "Don't walk away from me." Beatrice appeared behind him like a ghost in a robe. She glanced at me, then turned to him. "You must have done something to provoke him," she said, like it was obvious. I didn't respond. Just walked down the hall and into the bathroom. The mirror was still cracked, same break, same angles, same woman staring back, only now her silence wasn't surrender. It was calculation. I sat on the floor with my arms around my belly. The house had gone quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and Damon's heavy steps in the kitchen. I closed my eyes. "You will never grow up thinking love looks like this," I whispered to the life growing inside me. It was the first promise I made that I knew I had to keep. That night, as I replayed his voice in the dark, I realized proof doesn't heal, but it prepares you. That night, I couldn't sleep. I laid on my side, one hand resting over my belly, the other gripping my phone under the covers. I stared at the ceiling as the air outside shifted colder, signaling the approach of December. The world around us was preparing for joy, carols, wreaths, twinkling lights, but inside our house, the air felt heavier with each passing day. Damon decided we were hosting Christmas dinner. Not just for family, for neighbors, colleagues, even the pastor and his wife. He said it was good optics. I knew what it really meant, another performance. By the time the night came, the house looked like it had been pulled from a holiday catalog. Garland wrapped every railing, candles flickered on every surface, and the smell of cinnamon drifted from the kitchen where Beatrice supervised the roast like it was her throne. I wore a red sweater, sleeves long enough to hide the bruises on my forearms. My face was powdered, lips painted. I looked like someone who belonged in this glowing version of life. But under the tablecloth, my phone was tucked beneath a napkin, recording. Beatrice raised her glass toward Damon with a proud smile. "Our Damon's been such a devoted husband, hasn't he? Taking such good care of Aileen." People nodded, clapped. Someone even said, "You can tell he just adores her." I smiled. I had to. But I stared down at the flickering reflection of the chandelier in my water glass, hearing every word like static. I wanted to scream, but I just listened. That recording would say what I couldn't. People see joy, but all I heard was proof. Once the last guest left and the front door clicked shut, the quiet returned like a storm cloud. He walked past me, not even meeting my eyes. "You think I didn't see you whispering to Talia?" I froze by the sink where I was scraping food into a container. My heart started to pound. "She asked me how I was feeling, that's all." He snorted. "Don't play dumb. You've been turning everyone against me. First the doctor. What's next? The cops?" I didn't answer. I just kept scraping. He slammed his hand against the countertop, knocking over a vase. It shattered, shards flying across the tile. The baby kicked. I instinctively stepped back, away from the broken glass, one hand on my belly. "You already did that yourself," I said, voice barely above a whisper. He stared at me, not yelling, not throwing anything else, just staring. Then he turned away, shaking his head like he was the one who'd been betrayed. I spent that night on the couch, my feet tucked under a blanket, the baby shifting gently with my breath. I didn't even cry. I was too alert. The next morning, while cleaning up, I found the journal I'd hidden months ago. It was no longer wedged inside the Bible. It sat on the kitchen table, placed deliberately. Some pages were missing, torn out. There was a sticky note attached. "You like writing stories? Maybe I'll tell one of my own." My blood ran cold. He'd read it, and now he wanted to use my truth against me. I folded the journal shut, placed it in the back of a drawer, and walked calmly to the bedroom. I opened the laptop, uploaded all my saved recordings and screenshots to a private folder, then sent them to Dr. Talia's encrypted email. I typed one line in the subject, "If anything happens." Then I deleted the message from my sent folder. I didn't panic. I didn't pace. I just sat still, watching the cursor blink like it was keeping time with my heartbeat. When you've been silent too long, even whispers can sound like thunder. That evening, I set 2 plates on the table. Chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans. The kind of dinner that used to be our normal. He walked in a few minutes later, loosened his tie, and sat down without a word. I waited until he had taken a few bites before I spoke. "If you hurt me again, Damon, I'll make sure everyone knows." He looked up, fork halfway to his mouth, then he laughed, loud, bitter. You can't even stand without shaking." I smiled faintly, folding my napkin. "Then I'll crawl, but you'll still fall." He stared at me, not laughing anymore. That night, he didn't touch me, but his silence promised something worse. The next morning, the silence stayed. It wasn't peace. It was something tighter, heavier, like plastic wrapped over a face. Damon moved through the house like nothing had happened, humming while pouring coffee, flipping through the mail, commenting on the cold weather. I answered in short sentences, my voice even, measured. 2 weeks passed, not a slap, not a raised voice, just control, the quiet kind. He started bringing me breakfast, oatmeal with sliced banana, exactly how I used to make it for myself. He warmed my car before doctor appointments. He even showed up once at the clinic, surprising both me and Dr. Talia with flowers. I watched Talia's eyes as she tried to stay neutral, her hands steady while checking my vitals. At home, he massaged my shoulders when I sat reading. "You're tense," he'd say. I'd nod, holding still, pretending comfort. Neighbors waved when we walked outside. "Y'all are just the sweetest couple," one woman said as we passed with linked arms. I smiled at her. "Luck," I told her, "has sharp edges." Inside, everything was calculated. I knew he was waiting, either for me to slip or for the anger to rebuild. He wasn't changed. He was recharging. The next visit to Dr. Talia was different. She listened to the baby's heartbeat first, letting the steady rhythm fill the room. Then, as she typed up the results, She glanced up. "You're not the first, Aileen," I blinked. "But you can be the last, if you speak." I looked down at my stomach. I thought of the sock drawer, the flash drive, the pages he tore from my journal. "If I do," I whispered, "he'll destroy me before anyone helps." Talia leaned in closer, voice soft. "Then make sure you destroy his lies first." I left with more than a prescription. I left with a plan. A few days later, Damon installed a new home security system. He said it was to keep us safe. But I noticed where the cameras pointed, not at windows, not at doors, but inside the house, the living room, the hallway, even the nursery. I smiled when he showed me the app that let him watch everything from his phone. "Very high tech," I said. He smiled like a king gifting his castle. That night, when he fell asleep, I slipped into the study and placed my own camera inside a hollowed-out book on the top shelf, angled low and wide, pointed straight at the center of the room. At him. He thought surveillance was power. He never guessed I was studying him, too. The calm continued, but it got quieter, less words, more hovering. I felt him behind me, even when I couldn't see him. When I washed dishes, I could sense his eyes on my back. Then one night, just after 11, he burst into the bedroom, drunk and slurring. "Where's the money?" he growled. "What money?" "You've been taking it. My account's short." I sat up, heart pounding but face blank. "I haven't touched anything." He grabbed my arm and shoved me back against, the wall, but I didn't cry. Instead, I stared at him, cold and clear. My voice didn't shake. "Do it again. The camera's watching." His grip loosened. He turned, scanning the room. "What?" I didn't blink, didn't flinch, just looked at him like a stranger I didn't fear anymore. He stepped back, his jaw clenched. Then he stormed out, slamming the door behind him so hard the window rattled in its frame. The silence that followed was the deepest I'd ever felt. I slid down to the floor, knees drawn up. My hand found its way to my belly. "We're almost free," I whispered. The next morning, while the house was still quiet, I retrieved the SD card from the hidden camera. I tucked it inside a tiny baby sock and rolled it tight, placing it inside the back corner of the nursery drawer, behind unopened packs of diapers and lotions gifted by women I hadn't spoken to in months. The sock was soft, yellow with tiny blue ducks. It looked like hope. I thought the footage was enough. But monsters don't vanish when exposed. They evolve. I had just returned from the grocery store when I saw Damon's car already in the driveway. That wasn't unusual, but the second vehicle, the sleek black sedan parked behind his, made my stomach twist. I hadn't even made it to the porch before the door opened. He stood there smiling, smug and calm, like he'd won something. "Come in, Aileen," he said sweetly, stepping aside. At the dining room table sat a man in a tailored suit, briefcase open and documents neatly stacked. Beatrice was perched on the arm of the couch, hands folded like she was attending a church potluck. She wore pearls. "I thought we'd have a little chat," Damon said, motioning to the empty chair across from him. "About your state of mind." His lawyer leaned forward. "Mr. Red has concerns regarding your mental fitness, particularly during pregnancy. Given recent incidents, he feels it's in the child's best interest to begin divorce proceedings." I didn't sit. I didn't speak. I scanned each face. Damon's performative concern, the attorney's detachment, and Beatrice's smugness behind polite eyes. "You'll get help, dear," she said softly. "For the baby's sake." Help. That word landed like a slap. They were painting me unfit, dangerous, delusional. And the worst part? They thought I wouldn't fight back. So I blinked, slowly, and let the tears come. "You're right," I whispered. My voice trembled just enough. "I need help." I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone, pressing record as discreetly as possible. Would you mind if I record this? My therapist says it might help me process later. The lawyer looked surprised, but nodded. Damon gave a little shrug, overconfident. He started listing grievances, how I'd been unstable, paranoid, isolating myself, possibly endangering the baby. I nodded gently, offering weak smiles, adding quiet affirmations like, "I see," and "that makes sense." It was all going in, every accusation, every manipulative phrase, every contradiction. When the meeting ended, I walked to the bedroom, locked the door, and sat on the edge of the bed, breathing through the weight that had sat on my chest all morning. Then I smiled. He thought I'd drown in his narrative. I was just learning how to swim. That night, I started feeling tightening in my lower back. Not sharp, but rhythmic, like the thump of a warning drum. I called Dr. Talia, who told me to come in just to be safe. By the time I was in the hospital bed, monitors beeping quietly, Damon had arrived. He kissed my forehead, eyes soft for the nurses. "My brave girl," he murmured, just loud enough for them to hear. But when he leaned close, his breath warm against my cheek, his words changed. "Drop your act," he hissed, "or I'll take everything." I didn't reply, but the nurse across the room paused, eyes flickering toward us. She didn't interrupt. She just noted something on her chart, tore the sheet, and walked out quietly. For the first time, someone else had heard the mask slip. I was discharged the next morning. False alarm. But I left with something valuable. Confirmation. Witness. Back home, while Damon was on a call in the other room, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and headphones. I reviewed all the recordings, the bruises he denied, the shoves he rewrote, the voice he only used when no one else was around. Then I did what I'd promised myself I would. I compiled everything into one file. No edits, no captions, just truth. I emailed the file to a new account I'd created weeks ago. Then I printed several copies and placed them in envelopes marked only with initials. One for Talia, one for Deputy Harris, one for a lawyer I hadn't contacted yet, but soon would. I tucked a copy under the lining of my purse, next to the hospital bracelet from last night. He said I'd never leave. I said nothing. But silence has witnesses too. 3 days later, Damon's lawyer called. "You'll regret making things ugly, Mrs. Red," he said flatly. I held the phone close, my voice calm. "I already do, but not for the reason you think." I hung up, locked the front door, and walked slowly back to my laptop. The cursor blinked at the top of the email draft. The file was attached, addressed to both Dr. Talia and Deputy Harris. I pressed send. By the time he realized what I'd done, it was too late. The cops were already knocking. The morning they came, I was already awake. I sat on the couch in my robe, hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had gone cold an hour earlier. Outside, the sky was still deciding between night and morning, that heavy gray before light pushes through. Then I saw it, the flash of red and blue bouncing across the living room wall. I didn't flinch, I just listened. The front door rattled. Damon's voice came slicing through the hallway. "You called them? You liar!" I didn't reply. I placed my cup gently on the side table, stood, and walked to the doorway as calmly as if I were answering the door for the mailman. 2 officers entered, Deputy Harris among them. His expression wasn't cold, but it wasn't soft either. "Mr. Red," he said clearly, "we have a warrant. Step aside." Damon spun toward me, eyes wide. "You're doing this? After everything I've done for you?" His mother stepped into the hall from the kitchen, lips tight, eyes narrowed with disgust. "You ruined this family," she spat. I looked her in the eye. "No," I said, voice steady. "I survived it." Damon lunged forward, but one of the officers placed a hand on his shoulder, keeping him at bay. Beatrice started shouting over them, some rambling prayer or protest. I didn't really hear it. My heartbeat had slowed. For the first time in years, my body wasn't on fire with fear. It was just still. 20 minutes later, Damon was in handcuffs, being led out the front door. I didn't follow him out. I sat down at the same table where he'd once told me I was nothing without him and let myself breathe. By mid-morning, I was at the county police station. Dr. Talia met me there, her hand briefly squeezing mine before we were led into a room where the evidence was to be reviewed. Deputy Harris inserted the USB. The screen flickered to life. His voice, my voice, the threats, the insults. The bruises he once denied now immortalized in high resolution. The room was silent when it ended. No one moved. Finally, Deputy Harris leaned forward. "You did everything right, Mrs. Red. This time, he won't walk away." I didn't cry. Not in front of them. I just nodded, then whispered, "I didn't do it for revenge. I did it so he'd never touch another woman the way he touched me." Later that week, word got out. Not from me, but from someone else. Maybe a leak, maybe the lawyer, maybe a neighbor who couldn't mind their own business. The video found its way online. People had opinions. Some called me brave. Some called me a liar. "Another bitter wife trying to ruin a good man's life," one comment read. "She's just mad he found someone better." But for every sneer, there was someone who wrote, "I believe her," or "That was me once," or "Thank you for saying what I never could." I moved into a small apartment near the hospital. It smelled like new paint and cheap linoleum, but it was mine. I furnished it slowly. A second-hand dresser, a rocking chair, a crib that still had plastic on the legs. Every night, I'd sit beside it and whisper to the little life inside me, "We start small. That's how survival grows." Peace didn't come all at once. It came in pieces, like the quiet that follows a long cry, or the ache that fades after a deep bruise. One evening, just as the sun dipped low and golden through the blinds, I came home from a checkup and found a plain envelope on the floor just inside my door. No stamp, no name. I opened it slowly. Inside, one sentence. "He's not done." No return address, no explanation, no signature. I stared at it, fingers trembling. Then, I smiled, because I wasn't done either. The storm outside had calmed, but the one inside me had just begun to shift. It was no longer chaos. It was focus. By the summer of the next year, I was living in a modest apartment complex in Lexington, the kind of place where doors creaked, neighbors kept to themselves, and the AC rattled at night like it was trying to breathe. I didn't care. I had a front door I could lock without looking over my shoulder. That July morning, I held my son in my arms for the first time. "Noah," I whispered to him, as the nurse smiled and adjusted my blankets. "He's healthy, strong," she said. "Then he's already better than me," I murmured, not expecting anyone to hear. But when I looked at him, tiny fingers curled into fists, his mouth puckering in protest. I didn't feel shame. I felt the tiniest flicker of something warmer. The sound of his cry wasn't noise. It was a beginning. We left the hospital 2 days later. I strapped him gently into the car seat, heart racing like I'd never done anything more dangerous. On the ride home, every traffic light felt like a checkpoint. Every glance in the rearview mirror made me half expect Damon's face to appear behind me. But he didn't. The apartment welcomed us with silence. I laid Noah in his crib, a small wooden one I'd assembled myself, a little crooked but sturdy, and just stood there, watching him breathe. Some nights, I hummed him the same lullaby I'd once sung to him through my belly. The same notes that once trembled now came steady. It was still the same moonlight spilling across the floor, but it no longer looked like prison bars. It looked like peace, soft, honest. And then, one evening, just as I was changing his diaper, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. You think you're safe? The words hit harder than I wanted to admit. My chest tightened. I sat down slowly, keeping my eyes on Noah, trying not to let the shaking reach my hands. I called Officer Harris. Damon's still in custody, he said, voice firm but gentle. He can't reach you, Aileen. I know, I replied, but someone else wants me to feel like he can. There was a long pause. We'll look into it. Keep everything. Don't respond. After we hung up, I stared at the message again, deleted it, then blocked the number. Fear isn't always loud. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it wears someone else's face. The next morning, Dr. Talia dropped by. She brought bagels and a tired smile. You look like someone who's forgotten what sleep is, she joked, setting the bag down. I didn't answer. I just looked at her, eyes burning but dry. Healing isn't forgetting, she said softly. It's forgiving yourself for surviving. I nodded slowly. Every time I hold him, I feel both broken and whole. That's what strength looks like. She didn't stay long, just enough to remind me that I wasn't alone. A week later, I stepped into a small community center, not far from the apartment. A local support group had posted flyers on a coffee shop bulletin board, women helping women. No branding, no slogans, just a time and place. I didn't speak the first few times. I listened. To voices crackling with rage, to tears held back by pride, to laughter that made no sense and perfect sense all at once. And then one night, a young woman spoke, maybe 23, long sleeves in summer. I wish I'd spoken sooner, she said, voice cracking. Something in me opened. Silence isn't safety, I said, my voice steady but low. It's a slow death. No one moved for a second. Then someone clapped, then another. And suddenly the room was full of hands, of acknowledgement, of quiet power. It didn't fix everything, but it was a start. Late August brought something else. A plain envelope in my mailbox, no return address. Inside, the official notice. Damon read sentenced to 12 years without parole. I read it once, then folded it gently and slid it into Noah's baby book, tucked behind his birth certificate. So he'll know, I whispered, what monsters look like, and that they can be defeated. That evening, I took Noah outside. The air was heavy with summer, cicadas buzzing in the distance. I held him close and let the wind tangle my hair. The night didn't scare me anymore. It just felt like a place where the next day waited its turn. As I rocked him to sleep later, I hummed again, the same lullaby, no tremble in my voice this time. And when I looked out at the moonlight, it didn't feel like a threat. It felt like light, just waiting to be born. The days that followed came slower, softer. Autumn settled into Lexington with its crisp air and gold-dusted trees. Noah was almost 2, waddling through piles of leaves like they were his own personal playground. He laughed with his whole face, that kind of unfiltered joy only babies know how to hold without breaking. I had carved out a quiet rhythm. Mornings started with oatmeal and cartoons. Afternoons were stroller walks to the park or folding laundry during his naps. I found peace in the predictability, in the stillness. But peace is rarely uninterrupted. That Monday morning, I went down to check the mailbox like I always did. Noah still in pajamas, strapped to my hip, bills, coupons, and then at the bottom of the stack, an envelope with no return address. My name handwritten. I paused. Something about it felt heavy, even before I opened it. Back upstairs, with Noah playing near the couch, I sat at the table and unfolded the letter. It began simply, "He lied to me too. I thought I was helping love win. I see now I was helping cruelty survive." It was signed, Vanessa Cole. I didn't cry at first. I just sat there, the words swimming. The pain was familiar, but this wasn't another wound. It was a bridge. She went on. She spoke of Damon's charm, his manipulation, how he made her believe I was the villain, how he cast himself as the victim. She said she only saw the truth after it was too late, after he turned on her the same way he'd turned on me. I want you to know, she wrote, I'm sorry, not because it changes anything, but because I need you to hear it from someone who once believed him. That night, after Noah fell asleep, I read the letter again, slower this time. My tears came quietly, not from anger, but from something closer to release. I didn't feel alone in my story anymore. Weeks passed before I found the courage to reach out. We agreed to meet in a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory, public. When I walked in, she was already sitting near the window, clutching a cup of tea like it might run away. Her eyes met mine, and she stood awkwardly. Hi, she said. Hi, I replied. We didn't hug. We just sat. She looked different, tired, thinner than I remembered from photos I'd once obsessed over during my darker days. But there was a weight lifted from her shoulders, the kind that only truth can strip away. I testified, she said, voice low. But I also gave them the bank records. He had hidden accounts, stolen retirement funds from a client. I thought I was protecting him. Turns out I was protecting a thief. Why now? I asked. I couldn't keep pretending silence was noble. It wasn't guilt anymore. It was survival. I sipped my coffee, letting her words settle. He destroyed us both, she said finally. I nodded slowly. Then maybe we rebuild from the same ashes. We didn't promise friendship. We didn't trade numbers. When we parted, it wasn't warm or cold. It was something more important, peace. That evening, Noah was on the living room floor, surrounded by a jungle of plastic blocks. He was trying to stack them just right, tongue between his lips in full toddler concentration. You're building more than towers, sweetheart, I whispered. You're building new roots. I watched him for a moment longer, then stood and walked to the hallway closet. Tucked high on the shelf was a small envelope, another letter I'd never opened. From Damon, mailed from prison 6 months prior. I'd ignored it, unread, but that night I unfolded it. It was short, 1 sentence. I'm sorry. No details, no explanations. I folded it back, walked into the living room, and gently slid it beneath Noah's toy box. That's where it belongs, I said aloud, buried, but remembered. Later, I stood by the window again. Moonlight poured over Noah's crib like silk. He stirred softly as I hummed the lullaby, the same one that had carried us both through fear. But now my voice didn't shake. It wrapped around him like a promise, not a shield. I used to think surviving was enough, I whispered. Now I know living is the real victory. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance. Months ago, that sound would have sent me into a panic. But now, it faded like background noise. Not danger, just the city breathing. Then I turned toward the small video camera on my bookshelf. I'd kept it, not to watch my past, but to tell my story. If you're listening, I began softly, and you've ever thought you were too small to fight back, remember this. Monsters fear the truth more than they fear justice. Speak, even if your voice shakes. I paused, took a deep breath. I told my story so my son will never have to tell one like it.